value. Okay, this is the property and its value is ready here. Okay, so it works like this. We will have a selector, then a JSON object, which means this is not necessarily a JSON object. We will talk about different types of CSS as well, in which we will talk more. So it will have always a property and a value for it. Okay, property column value. There can be multiple properties in this particular box. Okay, now let's talk about the different types of CSS. Now CSS can be written in three different ways, which one by one let's talk. One is inline CSS. Next is internal CSS. And third one is external CSS. Okay. Talking one by one, what do we mean by inline CSS? So when the CSS is defined at the element level itself, okay, then we name it as inline CSS. For example, let's talk about one heading tag, H1, and I write something here. This is heading. Okay. So we want to change this particular text color to be, let's say, blue itself. Okay. Color has to be blue. So how we can define using the inline CSS? Inline CSS works along with the tag itself. So we know this is the tag H1 and we want to apply the CSS or the styling on this particular tag. So we will use one property called style. Okay, we will use the property called style. Style is used for the CSS. Whenever you see any keyword or the property called style with any of the tag, which means that that is talking about the CSS of this particular HTML element. Okay. Now we can define style here. And here it is given in double quotes. Then let's say we want to talk about the color, then color has to be blue. We can write here color as blue. Then this is heading, whatever is existing that can be copied here. Okay. So this is how we give it's the syntax of writing the inline CSS. Now let's see from one example. I will create a new file. Let me write an inline css.html. Okay. Now here I can create the boilerplate code. Here we can talk about the inline CSS. Let me remove this. Okay. Now here I can simply go and define H1. This is heading. Okay. We can open up with the live server. Okay, so here you can see this is heading coming up. Okay, now we want to define the CSS for this. So we can simply go and write H1 inside this itself style equal to, we want to define the color. So we can simply write color, and here you can see different values of the color that you want. So you can select any one of this. For example, I want to be of blue color. Okay, so I can go and write blue here. All right. Now we can go and see the reflection. Here you can see this reflected as blue color now. So this is a syntax like here the style property of any element, HTML element will let us know that this is about the declaration of the style. Okay. And in declaration, what we are doing? We are defining the property that is color and the value for it. Suppose I write one more H1 here. Okay. And let's say I write here, this is heading 2. Okay. And I go and see the reflection. What we find it out here, you only first statement is of blue color, not the second one. Although both have same element, right? This one is also H1, this one is also H1. But the color is reflected only to the first one. Why? Because that particular property or the styling is done to this particular element itself, not the other one. So this is about the inline CSS. Okay. Now we are going to talk next about the internal CSS. Okay? Internal CSS. What happens in internal CSS? That we define the CSS for the selectors. Internal CSS. For the selectors, now selectors can be again of different types. Let's talk about the selectors in HTML. So selectors can be a class name, okay, an HTML element name, element, or you can write it as tag as well. Then you have ID. These are the different types of selectors. Selectors means identifying the elements in that particular document. Okay. So let's start with the second one, which is element or the tag. Here you can see this. You have tags already. For example, here it is the head tag. This is the body tag. This is the H1 tag or the heading tag, right? So suppose we want to apply some styling on all the elements of that particular category or element. For example, I want all the headings to be of blue color. Okay. I want all of my headings to be of blue color. So I will use this as a selector. I will just write H1, which is the element or the tag name, and corresponding to this H1, this is selector. Then we will write an object, and inside this I can go and write color as blue. What it will do for all the H1 tags in this particular document, wherever this CSS is written on, it will apply that particular color as blue. Okay. So this is one of the type of selector, which is known as element or the tag name. Talking about the name, which is class name. So we can define the class name along with the any of the property, okay, or element. For example, suppose I want to write class name for this particular heading. So I can go and write here class equal to, let's say, heading 2. Okay, this is heading 2. So this is a class name. Now using this class name, we can write the CSS for this. Okay, again, the class name can be used with multiple elements. For example, I write heading 2 here itself. Again, I can go and somewhere write a paragraph. Let's say this is paragraph. Okay, paragraph. Again, I can write, go and write another heading. Let's say H2 now. This is part 2 of heading 2. Okay, something like that. Part 2 of heading 2. Now I want the coloring that has to be, let's say, heading 2, that I will define the size, let's say, or any font. Okay. Uh, okay, let's talk about the background color for simplicity. Okay, I want the background color of such heading 2 for few of the headings. That background color is black. Okay, so what I will do, I will copy this class name in two places. Here also, will do the same class name is occupied, and I will have to write the CSS only once. What I will do in the CSS, I will simply go and write the class name. So while writing the CSS for the class name selector, we have to write dot, then followed by the class name. So here dot, then class name is heading 2. So this is the part of selector. Now comes the declaration. So what we are going to declare? We are going to declare the background color. Okay. Background color as, let's say, I want the background color to be gray. So I can define this. Now this particular CSS will get occupied to this heading as well and this heading as well, both of the headings. Okay. While the problem with H1 was like this will be occupied, H1 will be applied to all elements that are written as H1 element. For example, if I write H1, for example, let me change the color here. H1, then only it will be applied to this heading and this heading, not this one. Okay. For example, I write H1 here and the color as blue. So this particular color blue will not be assigned to H2 because this is a separate tag and we have defined the CSS using the tag name. Okay. So that is the difference between the class name and the tag name. Talking about the third selector, which is ID. ID is basically standing for identity. Okay. ID stands for identity, that we know for each person there is a separate name occupied for that particular name. Similar to that, Each element in HTML can be defined with a separate identity. Okay. For example, I want to write heading identity here. For the first one, ID equal to let's say heading one. Okay. So this is ID for this. For example, let's talk about some other fields. For example, I want to define IMG here, and SRC is, let's say, nature.jpg. Nature.jpg. So I can define the identity for this. Let's say ID equal to nature image, something like this. Anything that we can define. Okay. But when we come to CSS part, how to select that particular ID? So for that, we will have to use hashtag. Okay. Hashtag, then the ID name. Okay. For example, for talking about this one, what we will do, we will write hashtag nature image. So this will automatically go and select this particular element, and it will apply the CSS whatever we write on here. Similarly, here we have written heading one. So what we will write, has one, has heading one. So this will be selector for this. Okay. So this was about talking about the selectors. There are three different type of selector. You can select using the class name, using the element or the tag name, and the third one is using ID name. Okay. Now moving back to internal CSS, we have talked about the inline CSS, right? While writing the inline CSS, we do not require the selector. For example, here you can see no selector is mentioned here. Why? Because this is already we are doing with some specific HTML element itself. So no selector is required here. It is auto-defined that this particular heading or this particular element is to be of the blue color, or the styling is defined for this particular element only. However, the selector concept comes up for the internal and the external CSS. Okay. Now talking about the internal CSS is written in HTML file itself. Okay. It is written in HTML file itself under a property called style. A tag, it's basically a tag, style tag. And this style tag has to be inside the heading or head section. Okay. For example, let's see, I want to define some CSS. So what I will do, I will go here and define a property or the element called style. And inside this style, I can define whatever CSS I want. Okay. For example, I want the heading to background color to be, let's say, gray. There are multiple properties that we need to talk about the CSS, but first let's understand the basic concepts. Okay. So this is gray. Okay. So here you can see we have written dot. What dot means? Because we are talking about the selector as class name. Here also you can say class equal to heading 2, and it will apply to all those elements where class will be mentioned as heading 2. Okay. Now let's go and see the UI. Here you can see this particular background color is coming as gray, and here also. Although these are both a separate tags. Here it is H1, here it is H2, although, but we are getting this as gray color. Why? Because the selector or the CSS is applied using the class name selector. So wherever the class name heading to is mentioned, the CSS will be applied to. Okay. Now let's talk about the third thing, that was using the ID property. Okay. So here, let's say I go and write the ID as, I can write it as heading 1. Okay. So I can define the CSS for this. For example, heading 1. And let's not talk about the font size. Let's talk about the background size, background color itself. I want the background color to be here as, let's say, wheat. Okay. So here you can see wheat color CSS is applied. So that is about this using the tag property heading 1, which is ID. Got it? Any questions so far? And this is known as internal CSS. Okay. You can define using the tag name also. For example, I want to write the H1 as, let's say, H1, I want the font size to be or I can talk about the font family. Let's say I want the font family to be Times New Roman. Okay. So here you will find Times New Roman will be occupied. Okay. All are by default Times New Roman only. So I will have to use some different value. For example, let me use font size itself. Okay. No problem. Font size as let's say 50 pixel. So here you can see this particular headings are of the larger size. Okay. You can make it smaller as well. For example, if you go and write 10 pixel only, then it will be of the smaller size. Okay, getting me? Here you can see these are heading ones and this is heading two. We have learned so far in HTML that heading two will be always of the smaller size than heading one. But this is being controlled using the CSS now. So no matter whether you are writing heading one, heading two, or anything, if it is controlled by CSS, that means higher precedence to CSS. Giving a pause for the next 2 minutes. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. Otherwise, we will continue about the external CSS.